Welcome to the Alex Salmond Show and a very happy new year to you all.
Yes, Happy New Year. But before we bid a final fond farewell to 2021, we thought we'd take a look at some of the show highlights from a turbulent year.
COVID still dominated in 2021, and this show fielded leading international expertise to help understand the most serious pandemic for 100 years.
They're protecting young people from something with a risk profile that's sort of the same frequency as the side effects of the vaccine. But the wider protection isn't being taken into account. So I think it's a difficult decision. I can see why they've made it, but I would personally have supported encouraging anyone who's 12 and up getting a jab, because I think it will contribute to our ability long-term to control the virus.
The team working element of the NHS in Scotland has been very, very powerful over the past few years. It's important that we continue that kind of approach as we roll out vaccination and allow, I'm hearing stories of people being told to throw away unused vaccine rather than find somebody to give it to. You're not allowed to give it to someone who's not in tier X or whatever. That's just nuts. We need to trust frontline staff to do the right thing with it.
And for Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, Sajid Javid, to lay a lot of singular emphasis on boosters is a smokescreen. The important way of managing case numbers will be as follows. It is multi-layered. It has to be multi-layered. So you have to immunize people who have not yet been immunized. You have to give the boosters to the vulnerable people. And furthermore, you have to also address other issues. The other issues are equally important. The other issues being wear your mask, wear it properly, wear it in crowded places, wear it on buses, tubes, trains, and crowded supermarkets. Furthermore, the big elephant in the room that we are not addressing, and this is extremely serious, is the seasonal influenza vaccines. We need to suppress influenza very much so this year. So it's a multi-pronged approach, multiple layers, as well as please attend to seasonal influenza immunization urgently.
So what's our scorecard? Our scorecard is we've been able to prove that 10, or actually now 13 vaccines are safe and efficacious by different regulatory standards, but by and large, that's the answer. So that was relatively simple. We did it in record time, starting from scratch in January 2020, getting to vaccines approved by November of 2020. Great. The bigger questions, though, aren't around vaccine research and development, but really around, can we make enough of this vaccine in order to vaccinate 8 billion people around the world? And then can we distribute the vaccine? Do we have the logistical system in place that will be able to put jabs into the arms of those 8 billion people? And those are going to be far more pressing questions this year and next year.
Tasmina, what struck me about these scientists, doctors that we had on, what excellent communicators they become. They really explain things. Certainly the ones we had on, they explain things very well.
And at the end of the day, the public are always after as much detailed information as they can get to help them through, obviously, the worst crisis that all of us have seen in our lifetime. So I think there's a general appreciation of having people on for a period of time to explain the situation at length.
That was very important. But COVID dominated the headlines, but international power politics was also back with a vengeance in 2021. A new president was faced with the endgame in Afghanistan, the most inglorious, ignominious American foreign policy retreat since Vietnam. Colonel Lawrence Wilkinson was the late General Colin Powell's chief of staff. He described for us how America entered the 20-year-long war on terror. While anthropologists, Professor Wade Davis and Professor Akbar Ahmed explained what the flight from Kabul tells us about the future.
The moment we selected the war instrument, we elevated al-Qaeda and its like to warrior status. We even had extraordinary difficulty coming up with a term to describe them so that Geneva Conventions and other things wouldn't apply to them. We lost, and we understandably lost, I think, because as President Bush himself told a group of evangelicals visiting the White House, my rage is up. Please help me restrain my rage. I think that was the most telling comment the then young, neophyte, inexperienced president made. It was all about revenge and secondarily about preventing a second attack. And we thought if we went after the head of the snake, we would prevent a second attack better. But it was an ill-informed decision to decide to use military power. We now are bathed in the Madisonian warning of when you give the executive unlimited war powers, you are on a dangerous track, a very dangerous track. And we're paying for it. And Afghanistan is just one of the debts we owe.
Obviously, somebody had to pull a plug on that war. It couldn't go on forever, for God's sake. On the other hand, the famous saying by Harry Truman, the buck stops here. And whether he likes it or not, those images from Kabul, like the images in 1975 in Saigon, which incidentally, it was interesting how the administration immediately went to those images with this incredible methinks the man protests too much refusal to draw any kind of parallels to what happened in Saigon in 1975. But anyone with the eyes to see could see on the video cameras, and on the television monitor, that it was exactly like Saigon in 1975. It was utterly parallel. We left in 1975, Nixon having spent billions of dollars to arm the South Vietnamese army. It was called the Vietnamization of the Vietnam War. The whole idea that Nixon's strategy was to get the American boys out of the coffins and back home, and we could just use money and power and arms to equip an army that in the end had no will whatsoever to fight, and had just rampant corruption from the level of the field up into the presidential palace. Well, surely that's exactly what we saw in Afghanistan.
But I also pointed out that when you urinate on dead bodies in Afghanistan or flush the Quran down the toilet, that is going to upset not only the Taliban, but all Muslims, and that create problems. People did pick that up, and recently Professor Noam Chomsky, who's considered one of the leading, perhaps the leading American public intellectual, again talked of the thistle and the drone and said that this is the book that should be read now after the fall of Kabul, because we'll make the same mistakes again and again.
But all conflicts have a human side. And to understand it better, we turn to Yvonne Ridley, a woman once held captive by the Taliban, and Hamasa Kohistani, an Afghan refugee who has gone to great success in the UK.
Don't walk away. The last time you walked away, you isolated the Taliban on the international stage, and Afghanistan became a playground for every wannabe jihadi. So don't walk away, it won't work. However, if you're going to come back, arm yourselves this time with aid, with practical help, with selfless motivation. I'm not sure the West can do that, but that country needs an army of teachers. They've just had a brain drain. They need doctors, professionals who can help rebuild the country. And the West this time can try nation building without weapons.
Because I feel like Afghan women are so oppressed, and they're painted as these, they're just dehumanized. Lives are getting lost left, right, and center, children and women and girls with what's happening right now. They're just, they're seen as numbers, as these blue ghosts with the burqas. That's all Afghan women are known as in the world. So I just wanted to show the world that no, we're also capable. We're just as good as anyone else.
It was so lovely to see Hamasa, a wonderful success story for the country, a young woman of colour who's done so well after coming over from such difficult times. It
was interesting when there were two women, quite different, but whose lives were touched by Afghanistan, both with compelling stories.
Absolutely.
In 2021, the political conference season was back. Who better to survey the political landscape than the doyen of political commentary, Professor Sir John Curtis, and two experienced political hands who disagree on just about everything. Former Labour MP Chris Williamson and former Tory Minister Edwina Currie.
The fact that Brexit still structures how people are going to vote so much gives the Conservatives a very considerable advantage. In contrast, the Remain vote is still divided between Labour, to some degree the Liberal Democrats, and north of the border, the SNP. So that legacy of Brexit, which, albeit it's not in the headlines, is still very heavily structuring party choice. And because on the Remain side, the vote is fragmented, and on the Leave side, it's relatively concentrated, that's giving the Conservatives a ballast that means it's proven very, very difficult for Labour to get the Conservatives below 40% of the vote.
A lot of people are frightened now, it seems to me, to speak their mind in Sir Keir Starmer's Labour Party. And, we're seeing the propaganda building up, the anti-China propaganda building up. We should be seeing the opposition speaking out about and opposing. And what we should be arguing for is a huge investment in our public services. We have our own sovereign currency. Money is no object in this country. We have lots of spare capacity. The only kind of inflationary pressures that are generated is when the government spends beyond, or any entity in the economy for that matter, beyond the capacity to absorb it. And to see this latest nonsense, this AUKUS so-called, this deal between Australia, the UK and the US, is just another example, it seems to me, of how out of touch our political leaders are. They're not dealing with the real issues, the real problems that are confronting everyday people.
It's only 5 years since David Cameron was falling over himself to cuddle up to the Chinese, and of course Hinkley Point, a massive investment in Chinese nuclear technology, while we're simultaneously exporting nuclear technology to Australia, with China as the target. Well, what's going on, Edwina Curry?
Oh, the French were very, very upset about it, not least because they had the clue. They really didn't know anything about it. And I feel a bit sorry for them because they've lost this huge project, this enormous order for many billions of euros worth of diesel-powered engines.
The French, the traditional enemy.
And what AUKUS is going to do is enable them to have what lots of other countries, including France, have, which is nuclear-powered submarines.
You know, Taz, it would have been fantastic if we'd been able to have that pair in the studio together.
Yeah, we could have recreated the adversarial scene right here for everybody to see. But I was interested in one of the new female voices in the House of Lords, Baroness Claire Fox. If anyone can upset musty convention, then Claire Fox certainly can.
Well, the irony is, I think, that Corbynism did have a base. I might not have agreed with it. I might have thought its base was limited, but it gave a certain enthusiasm to a particular group of people around, what passes for left-wing politics. I mean, I'd be very critical of it. I think a lot of it was anodyne and superficial, but I understood it enthused people. He did have big rallies, that's true. Keir Starmer, what does he offer? He supported the Corbyn project, but was a bit lacklustre. He was very much associated with the Remain camp, which, as I say, is not going to play well. And then he comes in and it's not clear what he stands for other than not being Corbyn. They could have found a way of being a different party, but they didn't. And I think it's gone. That's the main thing I'm saying is, if Labour is finished in Scotland, and I think that the lesson is that Labour, when I used to have mates in Scotland, spend every summer there, the Labour Party were the dominant party. I could never imagine in those days that there would anything other than Labour domination. And now look at them, and I think that the lesson is that once that slippery slope starts in quite as dramatic a way, then I can't see how they can recover.
I think what's interesting about Claire Fox, often in interviews she comes across as quite combative, but in that one-to-one interview, it was really warm personality emerged. And of course, quite a deep political thinker. I mean, the Battle of Ideas Festival has been partly her idea. As
she said herself when we were discussing before the shoot that, when you're just given 30 seconds or a minute for a soundbite, it's quite difficult to get your personality across. And at the end of the day, people do want to understand what politicians are all about. But join us after the break when we look at some of the show business highlights from our 2021 shows. We will see you then. Welcome back. The economics of the pandemic will occupy textbooks for many years to come. But all of us are living through the experience. We look for explanation from one end of the world to the other, from Professor Danny Blanchflower and Dr. Richard Mead.
I think there is a genuine issue for the countries that have allowed the virus to become more endemic, that even if the mortality rate is falling because the vaccination rates are taking off, we should be very mindful of the fact that there's more than one way to create an economic cost from the pandemic. And chronic illness, if that's debilitating and it's stopping people from living their normal lives, from working their normal jobs, etc., that's actually a very costly thing. And so if we think about the overall economic cost of the pandemic, we can think about the human cost and loss of life and the GDP impacts of whatever measure we put in place to try and stop the virus from spreading. But we do need to be very mindful also of these other enduring possible health consequences.
I think the economic implications are that people are worried and scared, especially the young. And in the United States, in the southern states, this is a big worry. So we've seen a divide coming. The world has now got two groups of people, not Republicans and Democrats, Tories and Labour. We've got the vaccinated and the unvaccinated, and we've never seen anything like that.
So there we have it, from the United States all the way down to New Zealand. But of course, Alex, you're an economist. You must have a view on the long-term impact of COVID globally.
Well, Danny Blanchford, good friend and a very, very prominent economist. But Dr. Richard Bede, I'd never met before, but really interesting work on the long-term impact, as you say, of long COVID. I mean, John Maynard Keynes once said, in the long run, we're all dead, famously. Well, hopefully, in the long term, we're not going to be dead from COVID, but nonetheless, the long-term economic effects are going to be with us for many years to come. It wasn't just economics and business, but show business, which kicked back into life in 2021. One of the new online shows which prospered during lockdown was Wonderbirds. On a warm summer day, these were the times, we took a trip to the iconic Pinewood Studios to find out why.
Can I just say, women are so good at recognising each other. It's a perfect example in front of us, and appreciating each other and what they have to offer. Do you get the same from men in show business? Do you? I mean, your mum and dad, of course, the creators of co-creators of so many things. Who got the fame out of it all?
Oh, my dad, definitely. My mother was actually the creative entity. She was the one who came up with all the storylines. She built the characters, she created all the characters, and she wrote most of the scripts. And yet my father actually got all the credit, which isn't fair, is it? So now, you know, people do say to me about, oh, it's great, you know, that to meet your dad and to know your dad. But actually, it was my mum who did everything. And in those days, it was always the guy that got his name above the title. And it hasn't changed that much, really. And it's only people like yourself, Alex, who, you know, you really support women. Of course, Taz, it goes without saying. But, you know, and it has been difficult for us. And I think we should do more to get, you know, women centre stage in the industry.
It was so lovely to see Debbie, Dee and Linda in person, because obviously we've done online interviews with certainly two of them before, and Linda's just finished a great pantomime run. I think she enjoyed being a wicked witch in that. And of course, Dee, as you know, is busy trying to get justice for her mum Sylvia, who requires recognition as women in show business should get for all the work she did on Thunderbirds. But it was wonderful to have such great women.
And what fun to meet them at Pinewood Studios, the iconic Pinewood. That's where they filmed all the Bond films. You know, I got the feeling it's shot and Connery was there.
Yes, there in spirit, no doubt. God bless his soul. Now, Wonderbirds is a new online show, but the biggest blockbuster on TV now is Succession, starring Dundee-born Brian Cox as a profane, taciturn patriarch Dundee-born Logan Roy. He spoke to Alex about acting, life and politics.
You know, I'm a socialist. I believe in egalitarianism. I believe that we're all, as they say in Scotland, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, and we all need that equal opportunity. Unfortunately, some people are more equal than others, and that's what's happened, and it's happened in the theatre, and I think it's really sad.
Well, as you know, Alex, I love Succession. I've been still enjoying watching it, but Brian said something really important there about Jock Tamson's bairns. I mean, as a mixed-race person, as a woman of colour, I know how much it means to people who've made Scotland a home wherever they've come from. To have that phrase attributed to them, we're all Jock Tamson's bairns, it's a lovely phrase. Yeah, I mean, Brian's a deep political thinker, but I thought the funniest story he told us was
because Logan Roy is famously expletive deletive to everybody, that people come up to Brian now, because he's such a superstar, asking for selfies and wanting Brian to swear at them as Logan Roy. And I've got this image in my mind of people rushing up to Brian Cox and asking to be sworn.
But knowing Brian, he probably does it, goes ahead and does it anyway, but that's just
well,
Brian
he does
Cox.
it in good heart, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Now, the future of Scotland is an abiding interest of this show. In 2021, we turned to history and historical fiction for an insight into whether Scotland stands where it did.
Well, the Enlightenment era, Edinburgh is a fascinating chapter in history, and it's not taught in schools enough, I don't think. When I went to school, we did the Industrial Revolution, and to me that was a bit, it was kind of boring to me, all about farming implements and innovations in agriculture. We should have been learning about the Scottish Enlightenment. What a fascinating chapter in history that was. Actually, Alex, you remind me of one of these characters, and I mean that in a nice way, because it was a time of a lot of visionaries, progressive thinkers. It was a time when even the judges and the lawyers were philosophers and passionately concerned with justice.
I think, as you yourself said when you were First Minister, that it would be fantastic to have Thomas Muir and the other radicals, which would mean the radicals of the 1820s as well, written into the curriculum.
At the present time, a peaceful time largely, the very fact that Northern Ireland itself is being used as a political football means that with them, as with the Scottish nationalists, the proof of English incompetence, that is actually much more valuable than, shall we say, a nationalist strain which kept on talking about grievances and how badly people are treated. The simple statement that the Union is no longer fit for purpose. That seems to be the case as far as Britain is concerned.
All fascinating stuff, and I have to take this opportunity to thank Andrew McLeod's wife Amber for sending me a beautiful necklace which I've worn on the show and I will definitely wear again, so thanks very much to Amber.
Well, that was quite a contrast with these guys. We did historical fiction, historian, and also about the 1820 Rising. So, what we can say is that history in one way or another in Scotland is alive, well and kicking.
It certainly is. And Scotland was in the news in November as COP26 decided the future of the planet and indeed whether there will be one. We spoke to top scientists to set the scene.
Alex Salmond, the chair of the COP, UK chair of the COP, had laid out 4 things before people assembled in Glasgow. One was to come with better pledges to reduce carbon dioxide emissions from different countries. That was not a success. And so that is a problem, a major problem for the world, in that before the COP, the world was heading for about 3.5 degrees of global warming by the end of the century, and we're still now heading for 2.7 degrees of global warming. So there was some progress, but nothing like enough. So that's got to improve in the next COP and the COP after that.
Let's just say you are in Glasgow next week. Where would you rather be? Would you want to be outside the conference hall giving these world leaders a piece of your mind, or alternatively would you like to be inside giving them a few solutions?
Well, I'm going to be there and I'm going to be outside, because that, I think, is where things are going to happen. Inside, it's very important that we have this political process, this legislative process, getting things right. But then what follows on from that is we've got to act on the commitments.
Well, here's a wee forecast for the new year. This issue of carbon capture, the ability to take carbon dioxide back and store it in the saline aquifers of the North Sea or otherwise, that's going to be a big issue in this coming year.
No doubt something we're going to have to feature again on the show as well. Now, we returned to location filming this year as well. My favourite outside broadcast was from Wembley Way, previewing the showdown between England and Scotland in the Euro Championships. Who knows, with both teams going well in qualification, perhaps there'll be a replay at this year's Qatari World Cup. But behind the tournament, the issue of racism in sport was never far from this year's headlines. For an important reflection on the subject, Alex turns to England legend John Barnes.
Very easy to point the finger at a fan who throws a banana on the field or who abuses you on Twitter. However, real racism, as I like to call it, is the majority of it you can't see. it's obvious, the overt racism, the bananas and the Twitter. But of course, when you look at the fact that there are 30% black footballers and they are probably less than 2% black managers, as much as black managers aren't being racially abused, the fact is that they're not being given opportunities. So why don't we speak about that? And that for me is a bigger problem.
It is very disappointing to think that there is still a lot of problems with virtually, as you said, overt racism. Don't get me wrong, I do believe the knee has become slightly symbolic. It's fantastic that not only your teammates, but your opponents are being empathetic with your situation and so forth. I think now it's time to maybe do a bit more action, if you like, and do things and make sure it doesn't keep happening as it has done for many years.
It was really good to hear from both John and Mark with some real life stories of what faces sports people, and indeed many in society are at the sharp end of racism, and I hope that their knowledge, wisdom and their standing will allow them to demonstrate why things must get better.
Well, they were enormous stars of the 1980s. And it's worth remembering that both these players in Scotland and England faced bananas being thrown at them regularly on the pitch. It's extraordinary when you think about it, and that they could talk about it in such an intelligent way is remarkable. Incidentally, John Barnes, I should say, was manager of Celtic for a brief period, but as he was keen to point out to me, statistically at least, a very successful one.
Of course, you've got an interest in Celtic being a Hearts supporter, indeed, have you not, Alex? So that was a year that was, and now it's time to take down our Christmas tree and look to what's coming up next year. Alex.
Well, I suspect COVID will be ever with us. Across the Atlantic, the question is, can Biden and Harris escape their political woes, or are they really vulnerable to a Trumpian comeback? And at home, will a challenge from Scotland finally emerge to cause Boris Johnson some sleepless afternoons?
I suspect so. Well, whatever 2022 offers, from all of us here at the show, our crew, the whole team, we would like to wish you all a happy and prosperous new year.
Yes, as we say in Scotland, have a good new year.
And we hope to see you all again next week. Until then, bye-bye for now.